Hi, this is John Atack, and I'm back with my good new friend, Joe Szimhart. It's been great fun talking with you before, Joe, and it just gets better, I think. It's more fun as we come to know each other.
It's like aging wine, like us.
Yes, certainly aging in my case, and a certain degree of whining as well, I must say I do. So first of all, we just wanted to have a relatively brief conversation about persuasion as it applies to helping people who have joined an authoritarian extremist or cult group. And I'm a little concerned that there are people out there who are set about persuading people towards their point of view. My approach right from the start, which was 37 years ago, has been to say, I want you to decide, that I want to help somebody, usually just giving them information that they don't have so that they can think about it rather than sort of pushing them to think about things. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's very important because it's very easy to convince people of things. It's very easy there are all sorts of tricks you can use to get somebody to agree with you. And that's what happens inside authoritarian groups. They use tricks and traps to get you to agree. And you can find out years later that it's actually a piece of sophistry that you accepted. It wasn't a genuine.
It's interesting. I'm listening to your language, which we all use, but are they really using tricks, or are they using what they believe are pious frauds? In other words, we'll hide what we do in reality because it's so precious, but it's controversial, and we don't want people to lose out on it.
And the Moonies call it heavenly deception, don't they?
Well, heavenly deception, and Plato called it the noble lie.
Yeah.
But so that's a useful tool all throughout the polis or societies about just about anything. You could say that a country's constitution is kind of a noble lie. It's fabricated, it's put together, it's cobbled together and based on a perception of how culture should act. And then if you get enough people to agree and it kind of works out in practical reality, well, then you've got something. Over time you adjust the model, and that's basically how the US Constitution survives, is that it's a model which is self-adjusting because of how it's built.
You should be able to amend it. I mean, that makes me think about Confucius and Leo Strauss, the founder of the neoconservatives from Chicago University, with this idea that they both put forward the idea it doesn't matter if you believe in God or whatever the cause is, but you have to pretend that you do to get other people to believe. And that's another form of noble lie. And I think it's an ignoble lie.
Well, what's interesting, I just wrote about Strauss to friends of mine I went to college with. They're all my age in the early 70s. And we've been discussing the politics, online.
As we all have this last 4 weeks.
4 of us. And I mentioned Strauss, and I mentioned that a lot of the neoconservative Congress people that have come in to American politics look to Strauss as a way of justifying conservative politics, because the idea is to conserve, whether it's made up or not, it's to conserve it means to keep the country flowing and give it a basis upon which to argue, a focus, of sorts. And so that in and of itself is not a bad thing. But when, of course, when it becomes a closed system and you can't argue to change it, in other words, add some progressive values, then it becomes a problem. So this is where Strauss, I think, he's interesting. I like Strauss. I've read a couple of things about him. Maybe you could explain him a little more. How do you understand him?
Well, I haven't read him, so you could probably explain him better than I can. What I know about him comes from a few years ago in looking at the way that Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld were influenced by neocon ideas. And he seemed to divide the world out into sort of the black hats and the white hats. He seemed to have this, which is not, I keep making the same joke. There are more than 50 shades of grey. But there are also quite a lot of colours. And I'm told the healthy human eye can differentiate 80,000 colors and tones. The healthy human mind should be able to differentiate more than just black and white, I think. And with the Straussian idea, it seems to me that it is a way of oversimplifying situations so that you can say this is right and this is wrong, and holding on to values simply to keep coherence among the population. So when we come to secularism, secular humanism, secularism in general, which can accept religion or not, you can have religious humanism too. We come to a place where all of the values have, there can be all sorts of shades of meaning. You can have different religions, when Vatican II, this strange acceptance that other forms of Christianity could be okay and that other forms of religion could be okay. That takes us into a place where it used to be very simple. You either agreed or we burned you at the stake, and you keep moving along. So
that's called the rule of law.
Yeah.
And that's what's necessary in the polis. And, even Socrates, if you look back, he submitted to the rule of law to the point of drinking the hemlock.
Yeah.
And
rather than walking out of the city, rather than going 10, 20 miles down the road.
Exactly. Yeah. He could have exiled himself and it would have been fine. But he believed in that, in quotes, simplistic rule of law, because without it, you end up with too many points of view, too many arguments, and society begins to collapse. For instance, the rule that once married, always married is a stabilizing force for society. And ancient cultures have noticed this for a long time. And of course, human beings being what they are, violate the rule continually. But and now we have laws which have loosened everything up. And you can see the conservative movement, not to beat this old horse, but really tightening up, because since birth control and since modernism, postmodernism, and all the relativism that comes along with that, the idea that anybody can express themselves in any way they wish because they have a right to that, given to them by God, so to speak. And then you get back into defining, well, who the hell is God, and what kind of personality is this? And so you can understand why the conservatives are frightened by this prospect.
Absolutely.
Of the dissolution of society completely. So they want to hold on to fundamentalist terms like the old King James Bible and whatever else they can grab onto, as if the old King James fell out of heaven like a brick. And there it is. That's it. It's in English. Jesus spoke English.
Of course, with a Catholic president, it may be the Vulgate that will fall from heaven.
Maybe that would happen. I don't know if Biden is that strict, but
I don't think so.
But you get my point. And I think most people do. This is the tension we're living under, and it is a result of the modernist scientific onslaught of redefining reality and how we see it. With all the benefits of it, we are also unnerved by the fact that this universe is expanding. What the hell's going on here? And why? And looking into quantum physics, and you end up with people like Deepak Chopra taking advantage of this vagueness of what quantum theory is and personalizing it, saying, well, we create our own reality. And then selling it, in his books and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little truth to that, but it isn't the whole picture. And you can certainly overvalue something like, we create our own reality. And I think that's where the problem comes in. But you were mentioning something earlier, which I think I got off the track, about intervention and about trying to help people understand things. Why don't you get me back on the track here and see what we're doing?
It's a very interesting detour. Thank you. It's simply that if I was asked to intervene, and I haven't done intervention work for about 25 years now, so it's been a while. Very often people would come to me, and hundreds of cases people would come to me and ask for my opinion, and that continues to happen because they're unsure. But at times I'd be asked to talk to somebody who was absolutely committed, particularly to Scientology. And I had to make it clear from the start that, an assistant of mine put it, they think you're a slot machine, a one-armed bandit, and they can put a coin in and you'll pull the lever and out will come their kid. And it doesn't actually work that way. So the first thing I'd say is I'm not going to set about getting anybody out of Scientology. That's not my objective. My objective is to help them to make a better informed decision about their involvement by providing them with information. So anything that sought to, I use the word trick because there can be a hidden agenda in persuasion. So my agenda had to be absolutely clear, and I would make it clear. The first thing I would say to the person, I was concerned that in many intervention situations, we'd moved from the kind of kidnap deprogrammers, the Ted Patrick Black Lightning, that approach, which may sometimes be justified. It's not an approach that I was ever involved with. Into the sort of, well, we'll deceive the person into the room. That was the next layer of, I met your mum and dad on holiday or what have you. I never felt comfortable with that. To me, it seemed necessary to be truthful from the get-go, which meant that if somebody said to me, have you been declared a suppressive person? I'd say yes. And that would, in fact, be the end of the conversation.
Well, let me back you up a bit. So in your particular approach, you're saying that prior to you meeting the Scientologist with their family, they gave that person your name and who you were. Okay, so there was a little bit of vagueness about who they were going to meet.
There's vagueness, yes, absolutely. But I would come into the room, I would say, this is who I am.
Okay.
I've studied up to OT. I've studied through OT5. I'm a class 2 auditor, Dianetic auditor, whatever. And I have no intention of continuing. I'm not going to go to Florida and do OT6 and 7 because I am interested in the history of Scientology. I have become invested in that. And it's been put to me by your friend, mum, grandma, whoever, that you have been brainwashed by a cult. And I'm here to help you explain the reality of the situation to your friend, mother, grandmother. And that always worked.
I found the same thing when very often the same idea, I would show up by surprise because obviously if you didn't set up some kind of a surprise, it would never happen in most cases.
Exactly.
And I think only about 5 or 10% of the time during the 500 or so interventions I've done, and I'm conservative about that number. I don't know.
Wow.
But maybe 5% the person knew who I was before I showed up. So it's a tense situation in some degrees, but I would do the same thing. I would come in, I would be introduced maybe with a partner, and I would be wide open. In fact, I would give the person my card, which had all my information on it, and I'd say, listen, this is who I am. Your family's concerned about something. I have some information I think you want to know.
Yeah. So
it's a sales pitch. But I also give them power immediately too. I say, listen, at any point in time, you want me to leave, or you don't want to answer a question or whatever, that's fine. You can ask me to leave. So the second step is, here's who I am, and now you have power over me.
Yes, that is so important.
It works, but it works very well because it eases the tension almost immediately. And then the third thing I try to tell them, listen, there's nobody else outside this house. If you want to frisk me, we're not being recorded, because I've had that happen. People have actually frisked me to see if I had recording devices on me. But once all that gets settled, and usually within 5 or 10 minutes it does, then we start this conversation. But the same thing I would do is, your family's concerned about your group. First of all, I'd like to help you explain to them what you think is good about this.
Yeah.
Because obviously that part of the conversation is broken down.
Yes.
And invariably what would happen, because I've studied up on the group or knew it very well, the person would wonder if I was a member of their group, because I'm talking about a lot of the same things they believe without any kind of rancor or criticism. So
and in the language they understand.
Yeah, in a way. I've had a couple of Hare Krishna cases where the person wondered if I was Hindu because I was using some of the words, and I'm not great at it, but using Sanskrit terms and Hindu mythology with some familiarity, and that's something they don't experience in America.
No.
So it helps. It's a whole trust thing to gain trust. At least if they understand that I can speak their language and understand their language, which means the internal mythology of the group, then we can have some rapport. Yeah. Because then we can disagree and agree on familiar territory. And we're not just arguing that, making a blanket statement that your religion is really strange and it doesn't belong in the United States, or something crazy like that. All right.
Yeah. I mean, I pick up on a small point there, which is that I like this idea of letting them frisk you and all of this, but I would, the door would actually physically be open in the room.
Yeah.
I would not be between the person and the door. And I think it's quite brave of you to bring that up at the beginning, because it might put a doubt in their mind, from the start. So I would, physically have a circumstance where they could see that they could leave, but by putting an emphasis on it. But you are so much more experienced than I am. I talked with about 600 people at one stage or another of their recovery over the years. And again, I didn't keep a tally, so that's a kind of, I think that's about accurate. But most of those people, the vast majority of those people, had some doubt, and they'd come to me. You're in a very different situation there. But and the only point I really wanted to explore, in this conversation is I decided that to do this, I had to be tremendously ethical. I had to be ethically concerned at every point. And where I see people who have a hidden agenda, so they go out to dissuade somebody of a belief without upfront saying, I'm here to do something, that concerns me. Where people have another belief that they wish to insert, because I'm guessing you had this experience, that you get to a point in intervention where the person has decided to let go of the belief system, of the dogma, and they turn to you and they say, what do you believe?
Yes.
And my response to that was always very short and sharp. It was, you wouldn't want to believe what I believe, basically.
Interesting. I've had that happen more often than not. And, what was interesting in these long interventions that go over days, the language begins to shift in the person's head about their perception of the group. When they start loosening up and expanding their point of view outside of the straitjacket thinking inside the group. And what I found was they begin unconsciously talking about the group in the past tense.
Yeah.
And when I start to hear that, I go, I'm home free. Now I can really move with the education process, because they're interested in learning what's outside and how the outside critic looks at their group. And so things begin moving a little bit better. But I watched for that is when something happened. Now, sometimes it was more dramatic. I've had people, a particular case, a martial arts cult I dealt with, and I wrote about it in my book. The Pat Ryan and I did a double intervention without, expecting it. We worked with one young gentleman that decided to leave it, but then he brought another one to our hotel room that night, and we didn't know if we were going to get attacked or what, but anyway, we let the guy in, and he sat very quietly. Now, he was a former Norwegian equivalent of a Navy SEAL in the United States, quite well trained in the martial arts, beyond the martial arts that he was in. But in both interventions, they just wanted us to talk and provide the information over a 4-hour period, and they would not say a word. So Pat and I were just there as if we were giving a hell of a long lecture.
Shooting in the dark. Yeah.
And so this guy, I call him Eric, but he stands up after that was over. We shut down the video and we all sat back and took a deep breath and looked at him because he was very stern. You know, he had his Fu Manchu goatee on, and he starts pacing back and forth in the room. I mean, just wired. And then he starts yelling. He goes, never, never, never in my life would I have agreed to leave this group. I knew that. I knew that coming in the room, that nobody could ever talk me out of this. And now I'm out. And, it was extraordinary. But so that rarely ever happens. Usually it's gradual. It's, you know, you get signals during the conversation with the person during intervention that they are making choices that are moving outside of the group milieu and trying to look at information differently. And, you know, this comes from an internal ambivalence that most cult members have about being in their group.
I agree.
You know, they struggle about the high demands.
Yeah.
They struggle about the rumors about the leader. You know, they struggle about the obtuseness of the teachings. You know, and you know, you did, I did, you know, that's more or less how I got out of it, is they just got too crazy.
Yeah.
You know, and I started looking into the behaviors, and so I kind of thought myself out of it, or struggled out of it by myself. I had no help, so to speak, from an ex-member or a exit counselor.
My situation was the same, that I left Scientology because I thought that Scientology had been taken over, and I found myself at the center. You know, about half the membership left around about 83. And, you know, the membership then was probably about 40,000, and half of us left. And I found myself at the dead center of this new burgeoning independent movement. And my belief evaporated as I saw more information about Hubbard. And so I was actually in a kind of fairly high pressure situation, because I was helping to run this splinter movement and provide information to it, and lost my belief. So I had a lot of people around me. In fact, while I was still involved in Scientology, the pressure would have been much less if I'd thought my way out. But now I had people all around me who had a real conviction and who were determined to keep me in. And when I sort of went, well, look, L. Ron Hubbard was clearly a liar, and therefore I can't believe him, and therefore I don't believe him. And they were going, no, but there's this brilliant technology which will save us all and do all of this. And I'm going, no, he's a liar. You know? And it was surprising to me that almost nobody could relate to that. They were sort of, yeah, okay, he was an evil man. Yeah, we'll accept that. But he wanted to do good, and he did good. And I'm still, and so for me, yes, I had to think myself out while under tremendous pressure to stay in. Of course, my status, my identity in the world by this time, you know, very rapidly, because I had hundreds of people communicating with me from all over the world. I had a title. I was called the chairman of the OT Committee UK. And there were court cases going on. There was media stuff going on. And right in the middle of this, I'm going, I don't really believe in this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't want to believe in it. You know, I have to disentangle myself completely, because I can't judge what any of it means anymore, because I'm caught in the middle of it. So I had to reject it all. You know,
what's interesting, what you're saying, you know, again, the word cult comes up, and it comes from cultus, which to me means in the Latin to care for.
Yeah.
You know, agriculture means to care for the soil, and I'm going to use that model now, because, you know, you have a Hubbard's tech, and you're saying, I can't believe it because the guy's just a liar. There must be something wrong with this. You know, and it's kind of like learning to farm a certain way, cultivate the soil a certain way, and your crops aren't doing as well if you really look at them as compared to other cultures and other farmers that aren't using your system. You know, let's say you're using Rudolf Steiner's farming system,
biodynamics. Well, let's say you're using Lysenko,
and you're not doing as well. You know, you're putting in a lot of effort, and the crops don't look as healthy or whatever, and the gnomes and the salamanders aren't really helping you when you pray about them at night in the full moon. You know, so
you put all of your water through a figure eight and it still isn't working. Yeah,
it still seems to be just bad water, but so the point I'm making is that the cultivation process is not good, and I think that's what you saw. You were suspecting that, and you have to really stop cultivating that way. You have to stop doing the auditing. You have to cut it out, and try something different, which is difficult to do because we go back to the familiar. It's the idea of cognitive dissonance. It's painful. It gives you a headache. Yeah. It can make you cry. You don't want to change your mind, so that's what the process is. And I think I personally went through it. I went through panic attacks. I was in a fearful position for months before I finally emerged from trying to cultivate that field of Church Universal and Triumphant, whatever that was, and Theosophy, and just freeing myself of it and to say, okay, I'm going to start all over. I'm going to look at the best techniques for cultivating the soil that I can find, and I'm going to look for it. I'm going to redo my life. I'm going to start a whole new farm. Yeah. So I think that's difficult for people to do, and that's why I think you find many cases of cult hopping, meaning that, let's say someone was in a New Age cult that believed in channeling, but that particular channeler, like J.Z. Knight, for instance, in Ramtha, upset them over some reason, and they found out she was, quote, faking it, unquote. And so they find another one, like Penny Torres, who started Mafu, which was a clone of Ramtha, and migrate to that group, thinking that's better, when it's actually the same farm. It's the same old soil.
I mean, in the publisher, when what is now called Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, which is the unexpurgated version, but when the expurgated version was published in 1990, the publisher had insisted on removing a chapter from the book. So still, 6 years later, even though I'd left and I didn't believe in any of it, I'd put a chapter in justifying belief in Scientology, which one day I must dig out and, from the 5-inch floppy disk or whatever it's on, and put out there, to my shame and embarrassment and humiliation, because in it I argued that even if Hubbard was corrupt, that didn't mean that his work wasn't useful, that the work itself had to be tested. And I, of course, went off and looked at Galileo and Newton, who were terrible liars. There are 3 editions of the Principium by Newton, and he improves the statistical tables in each one without doing more work. About half of Galileo's experiments seem to have been faked, according to statisticians. So if you do drop a piece of lead that weighs a certain thing in a bag of feathers, what we know is that the feathers will actually take longer. They're the same weight, but they actually cover a bigger mass, so the air resistance will be greater. So
unless it's on the moon, unless the experiment is on the moon. But
Galileo couldn't get to the moon. What can I say?
I know.
But yeah, absolutely right. But it's a specious argument, and I even got into talking about Freud and saying, we can see from, I'd read Anthony Storr's Feet of Clay at that point. I've read a lot more since. Frederick Crew's biography of Freud is devastating. But nonetheless, it was evident that Freud was making things up. He was stealing things. He was plagiarizing things. He himself never had analysis. He never had enough faith in it to have any himself. Because
the guru doesn't need it. The guru is enlightened.
Yeah, only Hubbard, of course, had thousands of hours of, attempting to get out of his condition. But I made this argument then. It's a specious argument because while it may be true of the physical sciences that it doesn't matter what the moral character of the scientist is, when you come to a psychotherapy, the moral character of the person, or a religious system does become vital. It's at the heart of the thing. So that Hubbard was a fraud actually does become highly relevant. I'm happy to, I sort of said I'll reject it all and I will look at it piecemeal and accept back anything that seems relevant to me. And I always am insistent that people look at the dogma. What do I still believe? And you have the right to continue believing whatever you like. But, think about what you believe and take it apart for yourself. And for me, in 37 years, I've not readopted anything from Hubbard because I could always find a better source for anything he said that was more accurate, and that actually was more helpful and was not trying to trap me into spending, all my money, all my children's money, all my grandchildren's money, all my great-grandchildren's money to achieve immortality, which I presumably already had,
Yeah.
But the point here is that for me, we have to be very conscientious about persuading people of anything, and that the best thing to persuade somebody of is to think for themselves and to give them, the tools whenever we can to think for themselves and to feel for themselves, which is something that's often overlooked when people put the weight on critical thinking. I knew all about critical thinking when I got in Scientology, or maybe not all about it, but I knew what the Socratic method was, and I've been practicing it on recruiters for some years. That didn't save me. The emotional conviction is I think so much more important. So
yeah, I think it's really wrapped into one person,
exactly,
and you have to, it's integrated. We can't help it.
Yeah.
And people, but this is a good point you bring up, because when we say cult member and ex-cult member, we describe a class of people as if they're somehow definable.
Yeah.
As a class, and they're really not. You have people that are highly anxious going into a cult, and maybe some of their anxiety is reduced because they have a lot of structure during the day, and they leave the group, and the anxiety disorder starts coming back again after the cult.
Yeah.
Because they're not structured anymore, and that has to be dealt with. That's not normal to the average ex-member, but so, and I've known people that suddenly they have a bipolar disorder that becomes increasingly worse after they left the cult than when it was in, because of the lack of structure.
Yes.
And so yeah, there's that kind of issue that does come up, but we're not all the same, going in and coming out, and there is no, to me, I just find this a false designation also, what's called the pre-cult personality. Okay, so maybe there is one, but that is not something you can go back to.
No.
After going through chapters in your life story. You can't turn the page back to chapter 2 or 3 before you join the cult and expect to retain those characteristics any longer, because you've been tainted. It's some people don't like this simile, but it's like having gone through a marriage and suddenly it's over for whatever reason. You can't just erase that history from you and start anew. You carry that with you. It's in your memory bank. It's going to be in how you react. Every now and then your ex-spouse's name is going to slip out of your mouth when you're addressing your new partner. And, this kind of thing can happen, especially early in a relationship. So that personality that was in the cult is somehow adjusted, purified in some kind of an alchemical education that we give ourselves, but it's not something that goes back to pre-cult. It just doesn't ever happen to me.
No, I agree with you. I long ago separated. I get into trouble for mentioning Jolly West because there are people out there who think he was a devil.
I knew him personally. Yeah,
I did too, and my
experience
was remarkable. He's one of the cleverest people I've ever met, and one of the kindest. He
very kind. Very
went
kind
out of his way to help me. That's for sure. So that his name. The best I can get is that his name exists on a CIA list. Nobody has offered me more actual evidence than that. I was told, for example, that he intervened at Waco. Well, I'm pretty sure that he did try to intervene at Waco because I saw him during that time in Los Angeles, and he was furious that he tried to get hold of these people and say, "What are you doing? Yeah. Stop it!" Yeah. But that was his involvement. But he wrote a paper about identities and pseudo identities, this kind of thing, and I remember talking with him about this, and I'm still with what he said, which is that we have a personality consists of many identities. So there's the way, my mood is one axis, or my, how I feel is one axis. If I'm angry, if I'm happy, if I'm disinterested, bored, what have you, that is one axis of my identity. The other axis is who I'm communicating with. So if I'm talking with the dog, or I don't actually have a dog, to be honest, but if I'm talking with my cat, I do have a cat, or I'm talking with my mum, or one of my kids, or somebody who works for me, or the plumber, or my boss, that will be another axis of identity, that I will behave in a certain way. These things are not in any way, they're not like multiple personality disorder. They're not like separate personalities. They're just according to the time and the situation. With a cult group, an authoritarian group, there's an imposition of behavior, of having an identity in a certain way. So, for example, in Scientology, my mood has to be enthusiasm. No matter how I feel, I'm meant to project enthusiasm. There's a way of communicating, there's a language to communicate in, and that is to some extent imposed. I found that I could move in and out of that identity as a Scientologist, but I met many people who surprised me that when they were with non-Scientologists, they spoke Scientologese. And so that said that there is some fixation there. I sometimes think of that as a kind of parasitic identity. The thing is not to try and move back before you were married or what have you, but to integrate what you've learned from that identity, not to try and expel it, not to destroy it, but to integrate it and bring it into the personality. So you can say, yeah, I behaved in that way. I don't want to behave that way anymore. I don't behave that way anymore. So a particular example in Scientology, something I never learned, it's called the severe reality adjustment. And I only saw one ever in 9 years. And that was a guy who was working for me. And he did it to my wife. He screamed his head off at her from a few inches away, telling her that she was suppressive and she was trying to destroy me, and because she hadn't sold any paintings that week in our agency. And when I confronted him about this, he put his head in his hands and wept. And he said it's something Hubbard did to us. So the severe reality adjustment could be a part of that cult identity, something that one does, that one's been trained to do, that one can overcome. But it's not like there's this, you can surgically remove this part of yourself, and everything is about digestion and integration and accepting what we have done and accepting responsibility for what we have done.
I think that's the I think that's the question, is what have you done when you were in the cult? People feel guilty leaving, having recruited a number of people in that are still in. Yep. They might feel guilty for having, not attended their parents' funerals. And, or they might feel guilty
about their parents' death. In Scientology, it's often the case. It's like they've dropped the body, and years later, the person leaves Scientology, and now the tsunami of emotion hits them.
Yeah, it's tough. And one of the big ones is, they donated, in quotes, their entire inheritance of $250,000 or whatever to the group that they'll never see again. That's painful for some people to deal with.
Means that Maharaji has a lot of Rolexes, or as a concept.
Or
good for the world.
Or Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh has 80 some Rolls Royces, that kind of thing.
You can crash one a week.
So the goal of the Rajneeshis was to buy him a Rolls Royce, a different Rolls Royce to drive for every day of the year. Their goal was 365.
Yeah, and they failed completely. And that's probably why he didn't live to be 60, although he looked like he was about 90. But so it goes. I feel happy with this conversation. I think
sure.
So I'm John Atack. This is my good friend Joe Szimhart, and we'll see you again. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, John.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. But Galileo couldn't get to the moon.